Welcome back to part 2 of this 3-part tutorial series. In the last part, we made these objects. And now it's time to start filling the bowl with the food items. I'll start with the broth, and I want it to be around this level of the bowl. So I'll go into edit mode and select this face loop here. Then, with Shift S, I'll choose cursor to selected. After that, I'll exit edit mode and add a circle. Right now it's too big, so we can go over here and scale it down until it's just slightly bigger than the inside of the bowl. In my case, 0.116 seems to work. Then, with the circle selected, I'll go into edit mode, press F to fill it with a face, and then exit edit mode again. Then we can create a new material for this object, and I'll call it broth. And then I'll delete the principled BSDF node, and instead I'll add a transparent BSDF node. Right now it looks completely clear, but if we go over here, we can change the color of it. This is basically the color that the objects will take on when they are under the liquid. And this is the color I used here. Now, if we look at the part of the chopsticks that are under the liquid, we can see that it gives this kind of strange grainy effect. To fix that, we can go over to the material properties. And here where it says render method, we can change that to blended, and that fixes it. But now when we look over here, we can see that there's another strange effect. And to fix that, we can just uncheck this box for transparent shadows. Now to make this material look a bit more interesting, we can add a nose texture and a color ramp. And plug the FAC into the FAC. Then here we can change the interpolation, and I'll set that to cardinal. And then we can adjust the color stop slightly. And again, here are the values I use. If you want, you can also adjust the seed of the nose texture by changing the dimension to 4D and then adjusting the W slider. I'll set it to 0.280. I'm also going to add an ambient occlusion node. And another color ramp. Then, if you invert this color ramp, we get a mask that highlights the edges where it intersects with other objects. So we can use this to create a sort of foam effect around those areas. And this works with any object you put in it. So it will get this kind of effect around it. And I'll just tweak the stop locations slightly here. Now, this mask is a bit too perfect and uniform right now. So to break it up a little, we can use another noise texture and a color ramp. I'll set the interpolation for this one to ease, and then just bring this stop in slightly. Next, I'll add a mix color node and plug this one into the factor, the ambient occlusion mask into the B input, and set the A input to black. This gives us a bit of variation in the ambient occlusion mask. If you want to make the effect more visible, you can bring this stop in even further. You can also play with the scale and the seed of the nose texture if you want. But I'll just undo that because I liked the way it looked before. Now I want to mix these together with the nose texture down here. So to do that, I'll just take another mix color node, plug this one into A and the other one into B. Then I'll set the factor to 1 and change the blending mode to screen. And that way we get both effects combined into one mask. Now we want to use this mask to influence the color. To do that, I'll first add a mix shader node and plug the transparent BSDF into the first input. For the second input, I'll just take another color ramp and link it up like this. Then, here on the factor, we can control the opacity a bit. 0.132 seems to work well, so we see more through it. Finally, on the color ramp, I'll set the colors for the broth itself. I already know the colors I want to use, so I'll just enter them manually. For the first stop, I'll set the value to 2, the saturation to 1, and the hue to 0.026. Then, for the second stop, I'll bring it in slightly and set the value to 10, the saturation to 0.945, and the hue to 0.046. That gives us this look. If you want, you can increase that value even higher, to something like 15, to make it even brighter, but I'll keep it at 10. You can also bring the stop in further if you want, but I'll leave it where I had it originally. And with that, the broth material is done. Next, it's time to create the noodles, and for these, I'll first make one noodle, and to do that, I'll use a curve. So I press Shift A, go to curve, and choose Bezier curve. Right now it's very big, so I'll scale it down to 0.1. Then I'll move it up a bit and isolate it with slash on the numpad. Then you can enter edit mode to adjust the shape, and here you can rotate a point with R, scale with S, and extrude with E. Using these operations, you can create a noodle shape. You can also extrude by holding down Ctrl and right-clicking where you want to extrude to, just like we did when we made the plate and bowl. If you want, you can also use the draw tool to create the shape, or the curve pen. If you want to add more points, like say we want an extra point in between these points, then we can select them and then right-click and choose subdivide. And to quickly remove a point, you can press Ctrl X. To make it look more like a noodle, we need to give it some geometry. To do that, we can go over to the Data Properties tab and expand the Geometry section. If you want your noodles to have a completely round shape, you can just increase the depth value here. Then, to fill in the holes at the ends, you can check the Fill Caps option. But in my case, I don't want the noodles to be completely round, so instead, I'll create a custom shape to use. To do that, I'll first exit edit mode, Then switch the bevel type from round to object. Now we need to create an object to use as the bevel shape. So I'll press Shift A, go to curve, and add a circle. I'll also scale it down since it's very big right now, and I'll set the size to 0.005 to make it way smaller. Then I'll move it to the side, select it, and enter edit mode. Now I can select these 2 points, and with S and X, I can scale them along the X-axis to create a more oval shape. Once that's done, I can exit edit mode. I'll then select the noodle shape again, and down here where it says object, I can click and then choose the object we just created, and now it's using that shape for the geometry. I can then enter edit mode again, and select all points with A, and then if you press Alt S, you can adjust the size of the geometry. You can also move some of these points around to make the shape look more like a real noodle. With Ctrl T, you can tilt a point. And with Alt S, you can make certain parts thinner or thicker to improve the overall look. If you enable proportional editing, you can edit multiple points at once. And if you use the scroll wheel on your mouse, you can adjust the size of the affected area. If you turn on connected only, it will only affect the connected geometry. By pressing slash on the numpad, you can show the rest of the scene again. And that way, you can see if you need to scale your noodle up or down. I'll turn off the proportional editing by pressing O and then scale mine down a bit. And when doing that in edit mode, you might also need to adjust the thickness again using Alt S. I'll also move it down, closer to the bowl, but I won't place it in the broth just yet, because I want to create the material first. To increase the resolution of the geometry, we can add a subdivision surface modifier. And that makes it look much better. Now we are ready to create the material for this noodle. And I actually wanted to have an outline as well. So we're going to create 2 materials. One for the noodle itself and one for the outline. To do that, I'll select the noodle, go over to the Material Properties tab, and add 2 material slots. I'll call the first one Noodles, and the second one can be called Outline. For the outline material, I'll remove the principled BSDF node and instead add an emission node, and link that to the output. Then here we can set the color of the outline, and I'll make it black. Then there are a few other things we have to do to make this work as an outline. First, in the material settings, I'll check the camera box for the backface culling. Then, to create the outline itself, I'll go over to the modifier properties, and here I'll add a solidify modifier. To make it use the outline material, we can expand the material section and set the material offset to a high number, like 100, which ensures that the bottom material is the one being used. To make it look more like an outline, we need to expand the normals section and enable the flip checkbox. Then I'll set the offset to 1. And now, if we set the thickness to something low, like 0.0004, we get this outline around it. If it doesn't look like this for you, you might need to apply the scale for the noodle object by pressing Ctrl A. Now we can make the noodle material. So I'll switch to the noodles material and then delete the principled BSDF node. And instead, I will add a diffuse BSDF, a shader to RGB, and a color ramp node. Then just link them up like this. Then on the color ramp, I will change the interpolation to constant. I will first move this stop in. And then we can add the colors you want to use here. And I already know which colors I want to use, so I will just paste them in. You can use the same colors, or you can pick whatever colors you want to have. Now the base color is done, and now we just need to add some highlights. And for that, I will take a glossy BSDF, a shader to RGB, and a color ramp. Then I will change the interpolation to constant and bring this slider in. If you want, you can also adjust the roughness here. I'll leave it here for now, but we can always come back to this later if we want to adjust it further. Then to mix these together, we can use a mix color node. Use this one as the factor and plug the base color into input A. Then here you can pick the highlight color. And I'll just copy this one and increase the value to, let's say, 3. Right now I get extra strong highlights because of this light here, which we can see if I hide it. I think it looks better without the light, but I also don't want to remove it, because it gives a nice effect on the plate and bowl. So what we can do instead is use light linking to tell Blender that this light should only affect the plate and bowl and no other objects in the scene. To do that, I can select the light and then go into the object properties. Then I'll expand the shading section, and under light linking, I'll click new. Now we can add the objects we want to be affected by this light. In my case, that's the plate and bowl. I'll rename this object to plate and this one to bowl, so they are easier to find. Then I can select the light again, and now I just need to take these objects and drag them into the light linking section. So now the plate is affected by the light and nothing else. Then I'll do the same for the bowl. And now both of these objects are lit by that light. But the rest of the scene isn't affected by it. I will make my noodle slightly smaller. And I'll also decrease the outline thickness slightly. So I'll set it to 0.0003. Now, before we place the noodle in the broth and start duplicating it to create more noodles, I'll quickly create one copy of it and move the copy out of the frame. And I'll call this object master noodle. And the reason I did that is because now, with the master noodle selected, I can go to the thickness value for the solidify modifier on this object and right click and choose copy as new driver. Then I can select the noodle here, go to the thickness value, right click and choose paste driver. And now, if I create more copies of this noodle, I can select the master noodle, and if I adjust the thickness value on the master noodle, the outline thickness will update on all the other noodles at the same time. So this makes it much easier to adjust the outline thickness when we have a lot of noodles in the scene. And you just have to remember to use the master noodle if you want to adjust the thickness of the outlines. I'll then delete these again, and then we can move the noodle down and place it in the broth. Then, using Shift D, we can duplicate it a bunch of times. Rotate the copies around, and then to edit mode to tweak the copies so they don't all look exactly the same. You can use Alt-S to make some of the noodles thinner or thicker. And you can also select certain points of a noodle and make just those parts thinner or thicker. You can also use Ctrl-T to tilt certain parts of a noodle. You can also create some more variety by selecting a few points, then pressing X and deleting the selected vertices to make some of the noodles shorter. And you can also use E to extrude a point to make some of the noodles longer, so they don't all have the exact same length. If you want to edit multiple noodles at once, you can shift select the noodles in the outliner, then just press Tab to enter edit mode with all of them selected, and enable proportional editing. If you only want to edit one noodle at a time, but still stay in edit mode with all the other noodles, you can turn on connected only, and then you can edit one noodle at a time, but still quickly switch between the noodles you are editing. If you think the bright bloom from the highlight is distracting, you can go to the viewport shading and disable compositing while you work on the noodles. If you want to adjust the highlights on the noodles, you can move the white color stop on the color ramp here. And you can also adjust the roughness value on the glossy BSDF node. If you want to control the highlight intensity, you can do that by adjusting the value of this mix color node. And as I showed earlier, if you want to adjust the outline thickness, we can do that on the master noodle. And if you use a thicker outline, you will probably need to adjust the stop here a bit. And play with the roughness value too, to make it look good. But I'll undo that again. And here you can see the highlight values I'm using for my noodles. Then you can continue working on the noodles until you're happy with how they look. Now it's time to create the eggs, and to do that I will press Shift A, go to Mesh, and add a UV sphere. I'll then scale the radius down to 0.1. Enter edit mode and isolate it with slash on the numpad. Then I'll enter front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. And then, while in face select mode, I'll select half of it and delete the selected faces. I'll then switch to vertex selection, and then we can shape this into the shape of an egg. So I'll select this top vertex. Then turn on proportional editing, and I'll turn off connected only. Now I can press G and then C to move it up, and with the scroll wheel I can control the radius that's affected by the proportional editing. So I'll do something like this. Then I'll take the bottom vertex and bring that up slightly as well. And with a smaller radius, we can get something like this. I'll also select the entire thing and scale it in slightly along the y-axis. And just basically shape this into something that looks like an egg half. Then, when you are happy with the look of it, you can turn off proportional editing. Switch to Edge Select mode and hold down Alt to select this outer edge. Then press E to extrude, right-click, and then use S to scale down the extrusion a little bit. Next, make sure you have the LoopTools add-on enabled in Blender. With that, you can right-click, go to LoopTools and choose Circle, and that will turn the selected edges into a perfect circle. Then we can scale this in and move it down slightly. After that, I'll select the outer edges and with Ctrl B, I can give them a slight bevel. Then I'll exit edit mode, right-click and choose Shade Smooth. To increase the resolution, I'll add a subdivision surface modifier and set the levels to 2. Next, it's time to create the egg yolk. To do that, I'll enter edit mode again. Select the edges here, press Shift S and choose cursor to selected. Then I'll exit edit mode and add another UV sphere. With this new one selected, I'll press R, Y and 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. Then use S to scale it down a bit so it fits just within the hole. Then I'll enter edit mode, and with S and X, I'll scale it along the X-axis to get something like this. Then I'll shade that smooth as well. After that, I'll enter edit mode again, and with vertex selection and proportional editing on, I can create some slight variation in the shape. If you press slash on the numpad, you can show the rest of the scene again. Then you can scale the egg down, rotate it, and position it where you want. And with Shift D, you can duplicate it. Since we scale in object mode, we'll also have to apply the scale of the eggs. So I'll just select these objects, press Ctrl A and choose scale. Now it's time to create the materials for the eggs. And I'll start with the egg white. And this will also have outlines. So I'll add 2 slots here. I call the first one egg white. And for the second one, we can use the same outline material as we made earlier. Then to create the outline, the process is the same as for the noodles. So go over to the modifier properties, add a solidify modifier, set the material offset to a higher number, like 100, flip the normals, then set the offset to 1. And give the thickness a small value like 0.0007. And that gives us an outline here. Then I'll switch to the egg white material. And here I'll delete the principled BSDF node. And instead I'll add a gradient texture and a color ramp node. Then we can take the color output and plug that into the FAC. And if you select the gradient texture and press Ctrl T, you'll get the mapping and texture coordinate nodes as well. And that gives us this kind of effect. I'll then bring this first stop in and adjust the location on the x-axis in the mapping node until I get something that looks like this, where the top is a light grey color and the bottom part is more white. Then to tweak the transition between the white and grey, I can adjust the X scale here. And I'll set that to 4, so it's a bit sharper. Then to add the colors to this, you could do that directly in the color ramp, but you could also use a mix color node. And use this as the factor. Then on the B input, I'll set the bottom color. And this is the color I use here. Then, for the A input, I'll enter the values manually, starting with the saturation, which I'll set to 0.737. And then the value, which I'll set to 1.648. If you want, you can adjust the color stop further, but I'll leave mine at 0.785. You can also adjust the location here more on the x-axis, but I won't do that right now. I will also add a highlight to this material, and for that I will use a glossy BSDF, a shader to RGB, and a color ramp node. Then I can adjust these stops slightly to create a highlight effect. And it appears right here. We can also adjust the roughness to see more or less of it. And we should also have the interpolation here set to constant. Then to mix these together, we can use a mix color node. Use this one as the factor, plug this one into A, and then here we'll set the highlight color, and I'll just set the value here to 2, so it's a bright white color. I'll adjust the location here slightly as well. So I put it at 0.82 instead. And I actually want to adjust the color very slightly also. I'll just move it a little bit. And here are the values I ended up using for the color instead. If you want more highlights to appear, you can also add more lights. For example, an area light. And then you could reduce the power. And that way, you could get some more highlight effects on it. Then you could use light linking to make it only affect the egg white here, for example. So we could call this egg white 1. And then select the light. And add that egg white here for the light linking objects. And that would give us this kind of effect here. And you can adjust the roughness a bit to make it more subtle. But I don't think I'll use this, so I'll delete that light again. Now it's time to create the egg yolk material, and I'll give these an outline as well. So I'll select it and add 2 material slots. The first one can be called egg yolk, and the second one will be the existing outline material. Then we have to create the actual outline. So I'll go over to the modifier properties and add a solidify modifier. Set the material offset to 100. Flip the normals. Set the offset to 1, and for the thickness we can use a low value like 0.0003. And that gives us a small outline here. Then I will switch to the egg yolk material, delete the principled BSDF node, and instead I'll add a glossy BSDF, a shade.rgb, and a color ramp node. Then switch the interpolation to constant. Then we can move this stop. And I'll leave it around here. Then to give it the colors, I'll add a mix color node. Use this as the factor. Then for color A, I will put the hue at 0.016. I'll set the saturation to 1 and the value to 1.5. Then for color B, I will set the saturation to 0.976, the hue to 0.054, and the value to 1.5. Or maybe even 2 for the value here. Then I'll scale the yolk down slightly, so I see the outline more clearly. Now to copy these materials to the other egg as well, I can first select this egg white, then the other, then press Ctrl L, and first we have to copy the modifiers. Then I will press Ctrl L again, and this time I can choose link materials. Then I'll do the same for the egg yolk, so select the one without a material, then the one with a material, press Ctrl L and copy the modifiers. And again, to link the materials. I will also scale this one down slightly, so the outline is a bit more visible. If you want, you can also add another highlight effect on the yolk material, with for example a layer weight node and a color ramp. Or with a texture coordinate and a separate XYZ node, and use the reflection output. Then we can add another color ramp and use, for example, the x-axis and a constant interpolation here. Or maybe the y-axis to get the highlight effect here. Then we can mix this together with the other highlight effect by using a mix color node. Take this one into A and this one into B. Set the blending mode to screen and the factor to 1. Then use this as the factor for the colors. I think I'm also going to reduce the outline thickness slightly for the egg yolk, so I'll set that to 0.0002 instead. And I'll do the same for the other one. So 0.0002. And that's it for the egg materials for now. Now it's time to create the narutomaki. And to do that, I will press Shift A, go to Mesh and add a cylinder. And I'll set the number of vertices to 16. After that, I'll enter edit mode and isolate it with / on the numpad. Here I will first scale it down along the Z-axis by pressing S and then C. Then, with face selection mode, I'll Alt select the face loop here, and then if I press Alt E, I can choose extrude individual faces. And I'll extrude it out so it looks like this. Now, with these faces selected, I want to scale them down with Shift C. But before we do that, we have to go over here and switch the transform pivot point to individual origins. And now, if you press S and then Shift C, we can scale each individual selected face along the X and Y axis. And I'll scale them down a little bit, like this. Then I'll go over to the modifier properties and add a subdivision surface modifier. And I'll set the levels to 2. Then I can right click and choose Shade Smooth. Now I can enter edit mode again and press Ctrl R to add some edge loops here. And with the scroll wheel on my mouse, I will increase the number of cuts to 2. And just click to apply it. Now I want to scale this. But first I need to go over here again and set the transform period point back to median point. Then with S and C, I'll scale these along the Z axis to get more sharp edges. I will also make the whole thing slightly thicker by selecting all and scaling it along the Z axis. So something like this should work. If you want to adjust the outer faces further, you can switch to wireframe view, and then by pressing C, you can use circle select to select around the object. Then, by holding down the middle mouse button, you can deselect so you only have the outer faces selected. And then you can scale this as you wish. Next it's time to create a spiral, and for that I can press Shift A, go to Curve and add a Bezier curve. And if we press Shift C, we should be able to see that it was added here. I will then enter edit mode and press X to delete the existing vertices. After that, I can press T to bring out the toolbar, and here I will pick the draw tool. Then I'll press Shift C to go back to solid view, and I'll go over here and check this surface option. And now we can draw a spiral directly on this model. And that will create a curve for us. Then I can switch to select box here in the toolbar, and then I can manipulate these points to make the spiral look the way I want it to. When I'm happy with the curve, I can go over to the data properties And if you adjust the depth slider under the bevel section, we can give the shape some thickness. But that also gives it this round shape here, and I want it to be more flat. So to fix that, I will first go over here and set the resolution to 0. And that simplifies it a lot, but it's still not the flat shape I want. So what I'll do next is go over to the modifier properties, and here I will add a shrinkwrap modifier. Then for the target, I will pick this object here. And now it's completely flat here. But now we have some overlapping going on here, which causes these weird shading issues. So to fix that, I can add another modifier, and this time it will be the weld modifier. And that already fixed most of it, but there are still some issues here. And to fix that, I can just increase the distance value here slightly, and I'm holding down Shift while doing it to do finer adjustments. And now this looks fine. But we have these sharp corners here, and I would like them to be more rounded. So to do that, I can select the spiral shape and add a subdivision surface modifier. And I'll set the levels to 2. And now these corners are more rounded. If you go over to the data properties, you can adjust this resolution preview U slider, and that will also affect the roundness of these corners. I'll set mine to 4. Now there is still an issue here, and that is that the spiral is overlapping with this model here. So to fix that, I can add a solidify modifier. And set the offset to 1, so it goes in the other direction. And here, I will set the thickness to a very low value, like 0.001. And now this model here is basically done. Right now, if you move this object though, the spiral doesn't move with it. So to fix that, I can select the spiral, then Shift select the other object, and then if you press Ctrl P, you can set parent to object. And now, if I manipulate this object, the spiral will move with it. Now I can show the rest of the scene again by pressing slash. Then I will rotate this 90 degrees along the x-axis, scale it down and position it where I want it. I will also select both objects and press Alt D to create 2 more instances of the same objects. If you want, you can also add a simple deform modifier to them to make them slightly deformed. And then you can adjust this value here to control the angle. And you can add the same modifier to the other ones as well. And for this one, we can use the y-axis instead. And then this one also. Now we have a slight issue here with the spiral after adding this simple deform. And to fix it, we can just increase the thickness of the solidify modifier slightly. And also adjust the weld distance a little bit. Now for the materials, I'll select one of these objects and add 2 material slots. I'll call the first one Naruto, and the second one will be the outline material. Then to create the outline, I'll go to the modifier properties, add a solidify modifier, set the material offset to 100, flip the normals, and set the offset to 1. I forgot to apply the scale first, so I need to select these 3, press Ctrl A and apply the scale. Then I can go back here and set the value to something low, like 0.0007. I'll then select the next object and shift select the first one. Then I'll press Ctrl L and copy the modifiers. Then I'll do the same for the last one. So select it and shift select this one, press Ctrl L and copy the modifiers. Now, when looking at this in solid view, we can see that these spiral shapes are not visible anymore. And that's because they are inside the solidified mesh. To fix that, I will select the spiral here. Then, where we picked the target for the shrinkwrap modifier, I will remove that target. Then I will press G and then C twice and move it outside of the solidified mesh. After that, we can pick a new target. And I'll just choose the new solidified mesh. And now this one is fixed. Then I'll do the same for the other ones as well. So I'll select the spiral, remove the target, press G and then C twice and move it outside. Then add a new target. And finally this one, select the spiral, remove the target, move it outside and add the new target. Here I got a bit of an issue, and that's because I didn't move it completely outside the mesh. So I'll just move it out a bit more. And then add a new target. And now this one looks good as well. Then, to make the material for these objects, I will select one of them, switch to the material we created earlier, delete the principled BSDF node, and instead add a gradient texture and a color ramp node. Then we can select the gradient texture and press Ctrl T. And here I will plug the normal output into the mapping node. Then I'll rotate it 90 degrees along the y-axis. After that, I will adjust the location for the x-axis. And I put that at -0.26. Then, on the color ramp, I will take this stop and bring it in slightly. Next, I'll take the black stop and bring that all the way over here. These are the locations I used. Then, to add the colors to this, we can reuse the colors we used for the egg white material. So I'll just take this mix color node, press Ctrl C to copy it, then go back here and paste it with Ctrl V. Then we want this color ramp to be plugged into the factor. Finally, I will change the first color a little bit. I'll reduce the hue and adjust the saturation slightly. Here are the values I use for my color here. Now this material is done, and next we have to give the spiral a material as well. So I'll just create a new material here, then delete the principled BSDF, and we can give this material a name as well, and we can call it something like Naruto Swirl or Naruto Spiral. Then, to make this material, I will add a diffuse BSDF node, and then here we can pick the color we want to use. And I'll just paste the color I want to use here. You can either use the same color or pick one yourself. And that's all for this material as well. Now it's time to create a seaweed, and to do that, I will press Shift A, go to Mesh, and add a plane. Then I'll reduce the size to 0.1. Bring it up with G and C, and rotate it 90 degrees along the x-axis. Then I'll enter edit mode and scale it down slightly along the x-axis. Next, I'll press Ctrl R and add 2 loop cuts. Then I will select this top edge and press G and Y to move it a bit along the y-axis with proportional editing on. Then I'll add a few loop cuts here, and in my case I use 3. And then I will switch to vertex select and move some of these vertices up or down to create some variation. To do that, I can press G twice to enable sliding. And if you double tap G and then press C, you can disable clamping, which will allow you to move it further up. Then I will go over to the modifier properties, and that is subdivision surface modifier. And I'll increase the levels to 4. I'm also going to go over here to the boundary smooth and change that to keep corners. Then I will enter edit mode again and select these edges. Press Ctrl B and give them a small bevel. So it looks like this. Then I will add another modifier, and this time it will be the displace modifier. And now we can see how that displays the mesh all the way over here. To fix this, I will set the strength to a lower value, like 0.005. Then I'll add a new texture here, and go over to the texture properties and change the type to clouds. Then we can reduce the size here. And that will give us this kind of effect. We can also go back to the displace modifier and adjust the strength further if we want. Maybe increase it to 0.007. I'm also going to set the shading for this object to smooth. Now in the texture properties, we can adjust the look of this texture a little bit, but we don't have that much control here. Like, we can adjust the size here, but we have no control of each individual axis. So we can't, for example, give the x-axis a different value. And we can't move the texture or rotate it in any way. And I want to be able to have that kind of control as well. So the way we can get that is like this. First, I select this object and press Shift S and choose Cursor to Selected. Then I'll press Shift A, go to Empty and choose Plane Axis. The other ones will work as well, but I'll go for this one. Then I'll scale this down and apply the scale for it. Then I'll select the seaweed, go down to the displace modifier and change the coordinates to object. Then for the object, I'll pick the empty object we just created. And now, if I select this object, I can for example move it or scale it, and that will change the look of the displace texture. I will scale this one in a little bit along the x-axis to get something like this. And we can still play with the scale in the texture properties as well if you want. Next, I will go back to the modifier properties, and now I can add a solidify modifier to this to give it some thickness. And I'll set the thickness to something low, like 0.001. Then I will add another subdivision surface modifier to to make it look a bit smoother. Right now, if you move this object, the empty object doesn't move with it. So to fix that, I can select the empty object and then shift select the seaweed object. Press Ctrl P and set the parent to object. And now, if we manipulate the seaweed object, the empty object will move with it. Now we can move this object and place it where we want it. And we can also edit it in edit mode if we want. I will also select both the seaweed and the empty object and duplicate them with Shift D and place the copy next to it. I will also adjust this copy slightly at the top, so it doesn't look exactly the same as the first one. Then to make the material for these, I will select one of them, create a new material, and I'll call this one seaweed. After that, I will delete the principled BSDF. Then I will select the other object and shift select the first one. Press Ctrl L and link the materials. Then I will press Shift A and add a glossy BSDF, a shader to RGB, and a color ramp node. I will also switch the color ramp to constant. After that, I will add 2 more stops here. And then adjust the values for all these stops. Here are the values I use for my stops. I will also bring this one in slightly here and give it a value of 2, because this will be the highlights. Then, to add color to this, I can add a mix color node. Have the color ramp go into the A input and set the factor to 1 and the blending mode to multiply. Then here we can pick the color, and here I will just paste the color I want to use. In my case, that is this green color. And if you want, you can increase the highlight color even more. Then I will take this glossy BSDF node, duplicate it, and put it at the end. And here we can adjust the roughness value if you want. Maybe put it at something like 0.66. We can also adjust the roughness value on this glossy node as well, if you want. And you can adjust these stop locations as well, to change how the material will look. And I will set this value back to 2 here. If you select the empty object, you can move or scale the displace texture, and that will also affect where the highlights will go. You can also edit the model further in edit mode, and if you want to do that, you should toggle these options for the displace modifier, so that it looks the same in edit mode. And then, if you edit the object here, you will see how that changes the look of it. Don't be afraid to experiment with the different values here. It's likely that the values that look good for your scene will be different from the ones I use in mine. If you want more highlights to appear, you can also add more lights to the scene. For example, an area light. And reduce the power to a lower value. And then we can use light linking for this light, so it only affects these objects. So I will call this object seaweed 1 and the other one seaweed 2. Then select the light and add these two objects here. If you want, you can give these an outline as well, by adding another material slot and choosing the outline material. Then we can go to the modifier properties, add a solidify modifier, set the material offset to 100, flip the normals, set the offset to 1 and give the thickness a small value, like 0.0003. But on this object, the look we get here looks a bit strange because of the shadow from the outline. And to fix that, we just have to go over to the material properties and then check the shadow option for the backface culling on this outline material. And that fixes it. The only issue with this is that some of the other objects look better with that option off, like the noodles for example. We can also see that the egg here changes. I think that the egg yolk looks better now, but the egg white becomes very bright. So what we can do in this case is leave it unchecked on this outline material. Then select this object and press this number here to create a new copy of the outline material. And I just call this outline 2. Then on this outline 2 material, we can check the box for the shadow option, and that way we can get an outline material on these seaweed objects as well, without it causing any issues. I can then select the other object as well, then shift select the first one, press Ctrl L and copy the modifiers, and again to link the materials. You might have to apply the scale for these objects as well. I'm also going to go over to the edge yolk materials and change the outline for those to the new outline 2 material, because I think it looked better with that one. And I think I will make the outline here slightly thicker as well, so I'll set it to 0.0005. And then scale it down slightly so the outline is more visible. Then I'll do the same for the other one. Change the outline to outline 2. Set the thickness to 0.0005 and scale it down slightly. Another thing you should do is make sure that the levels on the subdivision surface modifier for these objects are the same in the render as they are in the viewport. So for this one, we set the levels to 4 in the viewport, and then I should use that same level for the render, otherwise it will look different. And then down here, we had another one. And here the levels are set to 1 in the viewport, so I'll set the render to that as well. And I'll do the same for the other seaweed object. Set this one to 1, and the one up here to 4. Looking at the egg yolks again, I think these could probably have a bit higher resolution, since the highlight looks a bit jagged, and same for the outline around it. So to fix that, I can select it and then go to the modifier properties, and add a subdivision surface modifier. And I'll set the levels to 3 for both the viewport and the render. Now the highlight here looks more smooth, and so does the outline. But in my case, I got some kind of highlight appearing here now, and I don't really like that. So to fix issues like that, there are a few different things we can try. First, I'll select the object and then go to the material properties, and I'll switch to the egg yolk material. And the first thing I can try to do here is to adjust the color ramp for the highlights, and in this case that works. Another thing you can try is adjusting the roughness value on the glossy node. If neither of those tricks work, we can instead try to adjust the geometry with proportional editing on. And that works in this case as well. But sometimes it can be a bit tricky to get the highlight to go away without changing the look of other highlights at the same time. And if you have some highlight that you don't like and want removed, you could instead try to use texture painting to remove them. And to do that, you first have to add an image texture. Then I can create a new texture, and I could call this something like Egg 1 Highlight Removal. Then for the resolution, I'll increase that to 4K. And for the color, I'll set the alpha value to 0, so that the texture will be completely transparent. And then just create this texture. I'll position it here, and then we can take a look at the mask we are using right now for the highlights. And here we can see the spot I want to remove. So to do that, I can add a math node and place it here, so this mask goes into the first input. Then we can take the alpha output from the image texture and plug that into the second input. And I want to remove a highlight, so I can set the operation on the math node to subtract. Then to be able to paint on this object, I first need to do a quick UV unwrap. So I'll enter edit mode, select all with A, and then press U, and we can just pick Smart UV Project here. And I'll give it a small margin of 0.01, so that we don't get any issues with islands being too close to each other, and then just unwrap the model. Then I'll switch to texture paint mode. And I'll also create another window, and make that be the image editor. Now make sure that the right texture is chosen here, and then I can just paint to remove the highlight. The color you have on your brush doesn't matter, since we're using the alpha for this texture. And now that highlight is gone. If you want to add the highlight, you can set the operation to add instead. And then you can just paint where you want to add more highlights. And to not get any overlapping issues with the other highlights, you can toggle the clamp option. And then like this, I can easily add more highlights wherever I want. Now, if you do this on objects that share the same material, you'll probably have to separate them and give each its own material. Otherwise, you might get strange results on the other objects. If you want to remove your strokes again, you can switch to the eraser and just erase that way. I just want to remove the spot here, so I'll still paint over that part. And for that, I need to switch the operation back to subtract. Then I can easily remove it like this. And this texture paint technique does of course also work on the other models in the scene as well. So say I wanted to remove this spot here on the seaweed. Then I can use texture painting to remove that in a similar way. But on this object, we didn't use a black and white mask for the highlights. We used a color ramp where we set all the shades, including the highlights. So the way to remove a highlight here is slightly different, but still very simple. So I just set the value here for the highlights back to 2, since that value was reset to 1 when I previewed the color ramp. And then I'll add a mix color node. Then I can add an image texture and create a new texture. And I could call this something like seaweed 1 highlight removal. And I'll keep all of these options the same as I did for the egg, and then just create it. Then I can take the alpha output and link that to the factor input of the mix color node. Then I can take the color output of the color ramp and link that to the A input. And since I want to remove a highlight here, the color I replace it with needs to be the color that's under the highlight. And that's the color that's right before it on the color ramp. So I can just take the color of this stop and drag it over here. Then I can unwrap this model quickly. And I'll just use the same settings here. Then I'll switch to texture paint. And I can just paint over the highlight here to remove it. And then take this and plug it into the A input where we set the colors. And just like that, I can remove any highlight I don't like. Looking at this highlight here, it looks a bit rough. And if I want to fix that, I could also paint over it to add a highlight. And for that, I could just duplicate this mix node, take the output from this one and plug it into the A input. Then I'll add another image texture. And I could call this something like seaweed 1 highlight addition. Keep all of this the same and create it. Then I can take the alpha output and use that as the factor. And then for the color here, since I want to add a highlight, I can just take the highlight color and drag that over here. We can also confirm that it is the highlight color since it has the value of 2 here. Then I can use this mix node here. Make sure the right texture is selected, and then I could simply paint here to try to fix this highlight. And I can paint wherever I want to add more highlights to make it look better. Also, don't forget to save your image textures when you are done painting. This is very important because if you don't do this, your work will be gone the next time you open the scene. So just go to image and then click save when you are done. And the same goes for any other textures. Now, if you want more control over the texture painting, you actually don't have to use Blender's texture painting to do this. You could also use an external image editor to do this, like Photoshop or similar programs. Krita, for example, also works if you want to use a free program. And to easily do the texture painting in an external program, I can remove this texture I made before, and then I get the spot back that I want to get rid of. Then I can go to Edit, Preferences, File Paths, and expand this Applications option. Here you have this image editor field, and you can just link this to the exe file of whatever external editor you want to use. So as an example, I've linked it to Photoshop here. Then make sure the preferences are saved and close this window. Then I can add an image texture the same way I did before. And I'll just call it the same thing I did earlier. And I'll use these same settings. Then I'll take the alpha output and link it to the second value here, so that this spot can be removed. And make sure the object is unwrapped. And then go into texture paint mode. But instead of painting here, we can go over to the tool settings and scroll down to the options section. And expand the external option here. Then here, we can enter a resolution for the image we want to use in the external program. And I'll set that to 4096, so it's the same as the image texture I created. Then I can just click this Quick Edit button. And this will automatically open the software we picked in the settings. So for me that's Photoshop. And here we can see how this took a screenshot of the scene and opened it in Photoshop. And then, if I want to remove the highlight here, I can just do that directly in Photoshop. And to do that, I have to create a new layer, and then I can copy the color here and paint over the spot I want to remove. You don't actually have to use the same color as the egg, since we're just using the alpha in Blender. But I like to do it this way, so I can easily get an idea of how it will look. Then, when I'm done, I can remove the bottom layer. And this is something you have to remember to do. And then just save the image. In Photoshop, I can do that by pressing Ctrl S. Then I can go back to Blender, and to see the changes, I can just click this Apply button. And now that highlight is gone. And this does, of course, also work if you want to add highlights. Then I could just duplicate this node and link it to the first input. Then I would change the operation to add and use the output from this node here instead. Then I could add a new image texture. And I could call that egg 1 highlight addition. And again, same exact settings. And use the alpha here. Then make sure the right texture is selected. Go to Quick Edit. Create a new layer. And then you could just add a highlight wherever you want, by either painting it, or you could use any of the many tools available to do this. And this is what makes this so powerful, because you have a lot more tools here than you have in Blender's texture painting. So for example, I could create a selection using the pen tool and fill it with the highlight color to create a highlight here. Then just delete the bottom layer, save the file with Ctrl S, go back to Blender and apply it. And then those highlights were now also added here. And I usually use this when I want to add extra highlights. But this is not limited to just highlights. If you wanted to, and if you're good at drawing or using programs like Photoshop, you could do your entire texturing that way. And that's all for this video. In the next one, we'll finish the scene by adding some meat, green onions, and seamlessly animated steam. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the final part.